The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to John. When Judas had left them, Jesus said, "Now is the Son of Man glorified, and God is glorified in him. If God is glorified in him, God will also glorify him in himself, and God will glorify him at once. My children, I will be with you only a little while longer. I give you a new commandment: love one another. As I have loved you, so you also should love one another. This is how all will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
What a beautiful image we hear St. John tell us about in the second reading. For here we are in the second last chapter of the book of Revelation. We've skipped over most of the middle of it. And we arrived at the second last chapter of the Bible. And he tells us, "I saw a new heaven and a new earth. The former heaven and the former earth had passed away, and the sea was no more." Now in the new heaven and the new earth, I'm not sure there will be no sea. We can take the meaning from this that the people of Israel thought of the sea, the ocean, as being the place of chaos and of evil and of demonic activity. And therefore what St. John was seeing was telling us that there would be not a bit of that presence in the new heaven and the new earth. He says, "I heard a loud voice saying, 'Behold, God's dwelling is with the human race. He will dwell with them, and they will be his people. He will wipe every tear from their eyes, and there shall be no more death or mourning, wailing, or pain.'" This is a good passage to read during the Easter season. For we know that during this season we are celebrating the resurrection of our Lord Jesus Christ. Our Lord Jesus, who on Good Friday gave himself up to death, holding nothing back out of love for us and for our salvation. And his dead body was placed in the tomb. And on Easter Sunday, he rose from the grave, triumphing over death itself. What it seemed to the disciples like the end, as if there were no more hope, no way out, turned out to be very different, as now he was alive again. His body transformed, risen, glorified, no longer able to suffer or die. And Christ's resurrection was not an isolated event for itself, but the first fruits of the great harvest of the resurrection, the beginnings of the new creation, the recreation. That's the beginnings. And he intends to invite into this every human person, indeed, ultimately the entire universe, till we arrive at where we are at the end of the book of Revelation, when the entire universe has been transformed. And at long last, what you and I long for has come to pass. Because how often do we look around at things happening in the world, terrible things at times, or things that you suffer, or I suffer, or your families, and say, "Lord, why do you permit this? Why will you not bring this to an end?" And he will. He will. On that day when there will be no evil, and there will be no chaos, and there will be no death, no mourning, no wailing or pain. The day after Christ has returned and raised every person from the dead. And for those destined for heaven, has applied to them, to their bodies, the power of his resurrection, so that our bodies will be like his body. Risen, glorious, strong, beautiful, no longer able to suffer or die, in a transformed universe. That will be the completion of what began with his resurrection on Easter Sunday. And as we think of the saints in heaven, we think of how every saint in heaven is so good, loving, kind, generous, free and strong and brave. Heroes, outstanding heroes of goodness and holiness. We might think of that and long for that. And think also of what we heard our Lord Jesus say in the gospel reading there during the Last Supper. I give you a new commandment, love one another. As I have loved you, so you also should love one another. This is how all will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another. And that describes every one of the saints in heaven. Every one. What a beautiful picture it is. How much you and I long for that. But we shouldn't just focus on that promise, because we've got a long journey to get there. When we hear our Lord Jesus' words, this is how all will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another, we might be thinking, yes, that's how we are. We have love for one another. Everyone knows it. Do they? Do we need to look in the mirror? A little while ago, the Episcopal Church in the United States published a survey that they conducted. One of the questions was asking people who answered it to describe Christians. And in this survey, when Christians were talking about Christians, they said, Christians are loving and compassionate and respectful. Yes. But when non-Christians were talking about Christians in this survey, especially those who said they had no religion, the answers were very different. The non-Christians said that Christians are hypocritical and judgmental and self-righteous. Now, to be sure, both sets of answers could be biased. An overly positive bias from the Christians, an overly negative bias from the non-Christians. It's possible. But at least reminds us that we need to be honest when we're looking at ourselves, as it were, in the mirror. And ask ourselves, really, are we loving as Jesus commands us to? It's too easy to say, yeah. But are we? Would others around us say that we are? And so we could think of different times when Jesus commanded this, and different persons who might want to answer about us. So we recall that Jesus said, love your neighbor as yourself. Right? So love other people as you love yourself. And so we might ask, loving our neighbor as ourselves, not in any way being angry at them, hating them, wanting ever any sort of revenge against them. We might ask ourselves, what would your spouse say about you? Your children, your brothers and sisters, your parents? Would they say that you at every moment are loving them like you love yourself, with that level of love? Or we might ask, what about the golden rule when Jesus said, do unto others as you would have them do unto you? That is, in your actions, your behavior, act towards them as you would have them act towards you. Well, how would you and I want others to act towards us? Wouldn't we want them to be always gentle, considerate, being sensitive to how we're sometimes struggling and always being kind towards us? And wouldn't we want them to go further and be attentive to our needs and reaching out and help? We would. So Jesus told us to act that way towards others. How would coworkers, fellow students, how would your employees or your boss, how about the people that you encounter in stores or restaurants? Would they say that you love that way? Acting toward them the way you hope all will act toward you? Or then we come to our Lord Jesus' words here. I give you a new commandment, love one another as I have loved you, so you also should love one another. Ooh, that's the highest standard of all, isn't it? To love as Jesus loved. God the Son from all eternity, who lowered himself to take on our human nature, who in his public ministry reached out to search and find the lost one, to preach the truth, to heal, to feed, to do miracles, to embrace, to ultimately give himself entirely for us. as I have loved you, so you also should love one another. With the people that we encounter each day, as we go about our days in our families, in our work, in our studies, would they find us loving that way? Oh, Father, why are you saying these things? This is such a cold splash of cold water. Now I'm feeling down, like I'll never get there. I think of a seminarian in the late 1500s in France who'd grown up in a peasant farm family, wanted to become a priest, hoping it would get him into a better economic state, lift him out of poverty. His family hoped the same thing. While he was in seminary as a late teenager, one day his farmer father came to visit. But his father was dressed so shabbily, the seminarian was embarrassed. Wouldn't acknowledge that the man knocking at the front door was his father. And when he was ordained a priest at 19, in his early years of priesthood, he sought to mingle with the elites because he was wanting to get better, to get more comfortable. Now that's a splash of cold water. That's not what Jesus was talking about. This is how all will know if you're my disciples, you have love for one another. I mean, young Father Vincent de Paul didn't do it right at all. Oh wait, I am talking about St. Vincent de Paul. The one who by the end of his life would be an outstanding example of reaching out to the poor, to prisoners, to slaves. Founded communities to work on this with the inspiration for the St. Vincent de Paul societies today. That's what he became. And he loved. And everybody knew it. It's not where he started, though. He had a long road to grow. And we can tell the stories of other saints. Right? St. Francis, who we all know for his love of the poor, but early on was a soldier and a partier. Or St. Francis of Sales, known as the gentleman priest and bishop, who by his kindness and his gentle words in the 1500s was able to win many Protestants around Geneva, Switzerland, back to the Catholic faith. But who struggled, especially early on, with a bad temper. Conquered it. We don't even think of him for having it, but he did. And so it is that when our Lord Jesus gives us these commands, these are not burdens to be loaded upon our shoulders, though we do need to be honest in assessing ourselves. But you can also say these commands are promises. Promises of what you will become. You will become someone who at every moment, in your thoughts, in your words, in your actions, love other people as you love yourself. You will become someone who in all your actions does to others exactly what you would hope they would do to you. You will become someone who loves with the same power and sacrificial giving that Jesus did. You will become that person. For our Lord is making all things new. And that includes you. Those words that we heard in our second reading. The one who sat on the throne said, "Behold, I make all things new." You may remember hearing that in a movie, The Passion of the Christ, where the maker of that movie had Jesus say that as he was carrying his cross. And it's a particularly strong moment, I think, because he stumbled in carrying his cross, and he sees his mother, the Blessed Virgin Mary, there to be with him and encourage him. And I imagine when I watch that movie that as he, true God and true man, sees her, that in his human nature, he sees her beauty. Her external physical beauty, yes, but even more, the beauty of her heart and soul. Utterly characterized by love and holiness and purity and goodness and courage and generosity. Utterly no stain, right? And he sees this beautiful, most perfect creature he has made her to be. And in his humanity, he remembers, yes, this is why I'm doing this. This is why I'm suffering this way. This is why I'm carrying this cross. Because I can remake the universe. I can remake each human person. I can remake you. Me. I can remake everyone to be like her. Now, of course, this is not a fast process or an easy process. We look in that mirror and we realize we've got a long way to go. But with that confidence, with that certainty that if we will cooperate with God's grace, and that frees us up, doesn't it? It makes us willing and ready to take the hard steps, to make the hard changes, to pay the price, to grow, so that we can become this beautiful thing that he will make us. And so it may be good to ask yourself, what's the first step? It's a long journey, but what's the next step in that journey? Who do you need to love better today and tomorrow? What action do you need to take? How can you connect better to our Lord Jesus so that you can receive the power and strength to do it? This one who made the Blessed Virgin Mary, this one who remade St. Francis of Assisi, St. Francis de Sales, St. Vincent de Paul, this one who is making all things new, wants to make you new as well.